Hi, this is Matt Millery with Driftwood Tide Music, and I am going to walk you through, over the course of a couple videos, a quick overview of how I approached the mixing of my recent cover of the blues classic Reconsider Baby. So, we're going to dive in. I've hidden a lot of things on the screen that we don't need to see, so we can just kind of focus on the section I want to focus on right now, which is the rhythm section. So everything I'm going to show you didn't necessarily do everything in this order. I don't do a lot of work in solo mode. I do a lot of my mixing in groups or with the whole mix going. But for the purposes of kind of giving you an overview of how I approach this, we'll do a fair amount of soloing here. The first thing we did with the drums, we'll start with them, is we used Native Instruments Contact with their Abbey Road 60s drummer kit. It's a nice sounding kit that has a classic sound, and that's what I was looking for, was a classic sound. So after going ahead and tweaking the kit, sonically the way I wanted, with decay and tuning and how much bleed goes into the overheads, I made the decision to go ahead and actually do the drum mixing pretty much in the module, as opposed to breaking everything out in Pro Tools and potentially micromanaging it. So I used their mixer here. You can see I adjusted volume levels, pan, send to reverb. I didn't do a lot of processing. I really wanted to keep a pretty natural, classic sound, not overhyped, not overly modern. The kick, you'll see, I approached this very much like I would a real recording. In a real recording situation, I would usually have two mics, and in this case, I'm able to blend them, the in mic and the out mic, to get the type of sound that I was after. So the realism in the software is actually is very good. This is a great sample collection. I didn't do a lot more processing beyond that with the kick. You can see I added a little EQ, really just putting a lot of meat in the low end on it, and really did nothing else EQ wise to the kick. The snare was pretty much the same thing. Again, I did do some more heavy EQ on this, but I didn't do anything else other than set a level, send a little reverb to it, and do a little EQ. I did very little processing on everything else. It's very natural. And on the kit, I actually wanted to keep the overheads to a minimum on this. So the stereo image is pulled back, and I'm using the mono overhead and the room mics to give it more of the room sound. And I did do a fair amount on the room sound. I did do some EQ, compression, and subtle tape saturation, very subtle. So the only other thing I really did with the drums in here is I did use a little bit of reverb. I put a jazz club on it, and again, I'm not sending large amounts of signal to the reverb, just enough to kind of help tie it all together and make it just a slightly bigger sound than the actual room sound from the mics. Once I had this fine-tuned the way I wanted it, again, in order to kind of force myself just not to micromanage it and really allow this to be a classic recording, I bounced the track down to a stereo pair. Again, normally I would prefer to have a lot more control in Pro Tools, but in this case I just made the decision not to do that. Once I had bounced it down, and this is true to almost every track in the mix, I applied Slate Digital's virtual tape machine to simulate being tracked to tape. And then from there I come back in, and again, on pretty much every track, the first step in the mix is um, the Slate Digital plugin, and in this time, what it's doing is it's emulating the sound of going through Classic Console. In this case, a Neve console. So we'll walk you through the plugins, and you'll see the additional processing I did once I had a stereo track. So with that engaged, you're not hearing a lot right now. It does make a pretty big impact on the mix as a whole. The next step is the compressor, which you'll notice is not hitting very hard. Again, I'm not trying to crush the sound, I'm just trying to lightly control it and take advantage of some of the kind of the mojo of some of this classic gear. So again, it's pretty transparent. This is where you'll hear the most processing. One of my favorite plugins is the Pultec EQ. I've got a huge boost at 8 kilohertz that's bringing out a lot of crispness in the snare and brightening the cymbals without making them harsh. I am rolling off a little bit of the ultra high end, and I'm doing a classic trick of boosting and cutting on the bass frequency. I've done a little more boost than cut just to beef up the kick some more, but doing the boost and the cut just adds a little richness in the low end that I don't know really any other way to get. It's just a classic Pultec trick. You'll notice I do not have these panned out all the way. I know a lot of times people default to hard panning everything left and right. I want the music and the reverb to wrap around the drums a little bit, and so I've left them room by not panning them out all the way. I am running to a reverb. This is a Lexicon reverb. I won't go into all the settings in detail. It's fairly close to a preset with just very minor tweaks. And one thing I will go into though is that after the reverb I'm following it with a Neve style EQ, which rolls off a lot of the low end. That way the kick and the bass frequencies can go in. They can get a little bit of ambiance to help tie everything together and really make it feel like everybody's really in the same room together, but with keeping it under control. But you can see I'm really doing nothing else here other than sucking out a little bit of the low end and a tiny right there. So with the drums in place, we move on to bass. The first step with the bass was really to just create the sound of a bass that's been tracked through an amp. I recorded this DI. I ran it through a model with a 2x12 inch speaker, which is something I do a lot in the real world. And I also am modeling using a Sennheiser 421. Again, that's something I do all the time in the real world. So this is as close to an authentic setup for me as I can get, short of actually miking up the amp and doing it that way. The tape was not applied, the tape effect was not applied on this one because it needs to happen after the amp sound. So you'll hear that, it's very subtle. It's certainly, with close listening, you can hear the difference. Certain tracks, it makes a huge difference. Other tracks, it's fairly subtle. The next step is to come back into our virtual console. And you should be able to hear the low notes definitely have a little more oomph to them and a little more character. And then again, we're back into the 1176. Again, when I kick this in, you'll see I'm not squashing this. I'm just gently controlling it. And last but not least, an EQ. And again, in solo mode, this may not make much sense. You can hear I actually thinned out the bass a little bit. I've neutered the low end, I've rolled off the high end. I have given it some boost in the 100 hertz range, a little bit more body and crispness in the context of the mix, the slightly smaller bass sound actually works better. Now the last piece of what I consider my core rhythm section is this great jazzy guitar. As with most guitars, there's very little that needs to be done in the mix on a well-recorded electric guitar. This does go into the virtual console, and then it goes into a compressor. I'll let you hear the compressor again. You can see it's barely moving in these little peaks. Occasionally are just a hair too much, and this pulls them down. But more so, this is a character piece. This compressor is based on like the Fairchild or the Manley Very Mew, and it just has a nice character to it. So it might be hard to hear, but you can definitely feel the impact in the mix. This is a great plugin, and with the EQ, we're doing very little here. We're rolling off the high end, we're clearing out the low end, we're giving a little bit of extra body and a very tiny bit of extra bite, and that's it. Both the bass and the guitar are going to the reverb unit. The guitar has so much spring reverb on it already from the amp that it doesn't need much, and the bass doesn't either. So most of the signal going into the reverb at this point is the drums. So the reverb is bypassed right now, and there it is. So it's subtle. That's exactly what it's meant to be. Again, the drums were already recorded in a room. There's already some reverb there. I just want to help finish tying everything together. So the last thing I'll point out about the rhythm section is that I do have the drums, the bass, and the main rhythm guitar running into a sub. And on this sub, I'm compressing it again extremely lightly. Again, you'll notice that we're not even getting a decibel of compression out of this throughout most of the song. Occasional little peaks. Again, it's a light thing. It's not meant to squash it. This is just to control a few of the harder hits, and more so than anything, it adds a little bit of character, and in my opinion, I feel like it helps gel the track together a little better. So we'll take a listen. Let me turn the makeup gain down so you can try to hear the compressor itself a little bit more. So hopefully that comes through okay in the video, but it has a nice character to it. This drive function is something that's not actually on the hardware that's emulating, which is a Focusrite Red compressor. But by turning this up, you can simulate the impact on a real unit of actually running the makeup gain hotter, which has a pleasing effect. So that's the rhythm section. I'll be back with a couple of other videos to kind of go through the rest of the song. Hope you enjoy it.